Respected viewers, brace yourself because what I'm about to reveal is not speculation, not hopium, and definitely not something you will hear on CNBC or Bloomberg. This is the kind of financial shift that happens quietly, surgically, while retail is distracted and then explodes when it is already too late to position. Because Japan, yes, Japan, the most disciplined bond market on earth, is making moves around XRP that should make every serious investor sit upright in shock. Because when you hear the phrase XRP bonds in Japan, you are not hearing a gimmick. You are hearing the collision of traditional sovereign-style debt logic with next-generation settlement rails built by Ripple. And that alone should trigger one brutal question in your mind. Why would the most conservative financial culture on the planet even touch a digital asset unless something massive was already locked in behind the scenes? And here is where it gets insane, because Japanese institutions have deep historical ties to Ripple through banking corridors, liquidity experiments, and cross-border settlement trials that the mainstream media buried years ago. And now suddenly, the narrative is shifting from experiments to instruments, from pilots to bonds. And if you think bonds are boring, think again. Bonds are power. Bonds are legitimacy. Bonds are how governments and mega funds like BlackRock quietly move trillions while everyone else argues on social media. So ask yourself this: why would a system that already controls the global bond market even glance at XRP unless it solved a problem that fiat rails cannot? And before you dismiss this as hype, remember that Japan does not move fast, but when it moves with intention, with coordination, often in alignment with global bodies like the International Monetary Fund, and under regulatory umbrellas that make the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission look reactive rather than proactive. And yes, I am saying this clearly. This changes everything because bonds built on or connected to XRP infrastructure imply predictable cash flows, institutional trust, and settlement certainty, three things retail has been told crypto can never have. And yet here we are, staring at a setup that screams pre-positioning. So do not sit there passively. Smash the like button, subscribe right now, and turn on notifications, because what I am laying out in this series is not for tourists. It is for people who want to understand what is happening before the headlines flip. Because Japan's financial core, influenced by entities like Bank of Japan and corporate powerhouses such as SBI Holdings, does not experiment in public. It executes quietly, and when the public finally notices, the repricing is violent, sudden, and unforgiving. And the most terrifying part is that XRP has been sitting in plain sight this entire time while the world laughed, doubted, and ignored the signals. Now let us move deeper, because this is where the narrative stops being theoretical and starts becoming dangerous to anyone who is underexposed. And this is where data, authority, and institutional fingerprints quietly surface. Because Japan's financial system is not just banks and savers. It is a lattice of mega institutions like Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group and Nomura that operate in lockstep with global standards bodies. And when signals emerge from this environment, they are never accidental. They are stress-tested, vetted, and aligned with future monetary architecture. And this is where XRP bonds stop sounding like a rumor and start sounding like a prototype for a new class of financial instruments. Because bonds are not issued unless there is confidence in settlement finality, liquidity depth, and regulatory clarity. And XRP, unlike most digital assets, has spent years being dragged through legal fire, only to emerge cleaner, leaner, and more compliant than almost anything else in the space. And insiders know this, even if social media refuses to admit it. Here is the part that should make your stomach drop. Japan has been actively exploring tokenized assets, programmable money, and next-generation settlement layers in coordination with international forums tied to the Bank for International Settlements, the same BIS that quietly shapes how central banks think, talk, and ultimately act. And when you hear whispers of bonds intersecting with XRP infrastructure, what you are really hearing is the early scaffolding of tokenized debt markets, where issuance, settlement, and redemption happen faster, cheaper, and with less counterparty risk than legacy rails can ever offer. And if that sounds futuristic, understand that Japan has already run pilot programs in digital securities while other countries are still arguing about definitions. And this is not retail DeFi nonsense, this is institution-first engineering. And ask yourself this brutal question: why would conservative Japanese capital even flirt with a system unless it was compatible with global messaging standards like ISO 2022, unless it could interface with networks connected to SWIFT, and unless it had advocates quietly reinforcing its role at elite gatherings linked to the World Economic Forum? Because power does not announce itself on Twitter, it coordinates behind closed doors. And what retail calls conspiracy, institutions call strategy. And this is why the media keeps the coverage shallow, dismissive, and fragmented, because the moment the public understands that XRP is being positioned not as a speculative token but as a financial plumbing layer for real instruments like bonds, the entire valuation framework collapses and has to be rebuilt from scratch. This is not about price yet. This is about legitimacy, authority, and alignment. And Japan does not align lightly. It aligns when the blueprint is already drawn. And that is why this phase feels quiet, almost boring to outsiders, while insiders are calibrating exposure, building products, and waiting for regulatory dominoes to fall globally. So if you feel like you are early and confused, good. That is exactly where you are supposed to be before a structural shift becomes obvious. Now, prepare yourself, because this is where the story gets explosive, where the catalyst emerges, and where all the FUD, skepticism, and media noise gets obliterated by cold, hard institutional logic. Because what Japan is doing is not incremental, it is catalytic. It is a move that forces other markets to respond or be left behind, and the catalyst is twofold. One, the formal structuring of XRP-based bonds that create a credible, regulated, and liquid instrument for global investors. And two, the cascading validation this gives to Ripple's technology stack, which has quietly been integrated into corridors used by megabanks like Mizuho Financial Group and cross-border settlement alliances linked to JP Morgan. And the implications are jaw-dropping, because once these bonds start trading, the visibility, adoption, and systemic integration of XRP skyrockets in a way that no retail pump could ever replicate. And the mainstream will claim it came out of nowhere, while you already know the blueprint was years in the making, meticulously engineered and quietly stress-tested. Now let's address the elephant in the room, the FUD, the media skepticism, and the endless Twitter doom loops. Because if you think this is just another crypto story, you are dangerously misinformed. And the reality is the SEC's legal battles, regulatory whispers, and headline-grabbing lawsuits have been a smokescreen, a distraction designed to keep retail watching while the real structural foundation is being laid. Because insiders understand one brutal truth: legitimacy is not built on hype, it is built on execution. And XRP bonds in Japan are the textbook case of execution over speculation. And while mainstream pundits debate if this will work, mega institutions are quietly allocating capital, designing issuance strategies, and even exploring secondary market instruments. Because the ROI on ignoring systemic innovation is catastrophic. Ask yourself this critical question: if the IMF, BIS, and Japan's Ministry of Finance are all nodding subtly, if megabanks are quietly integrating with RippleNet and exploring tokenized instruments, why would you wait for confirmation from CNBC or CoinDesk when the structural shift is literally happening under their noses? And the answer is obvious: because retail is always late, and you are not here to be late. You are here to position yourself ahead of the curve, ahead of the herd, ahead of a narrative shift that will redefine how digital assets interface with traditional finance forever. So, if you are still watching and still skeptical, you need to understand that this is not theoretical. This is practical, actionable, and urgent. And ignoring it risks being on the outside of the next massive institutional wave that will hit XRP like a tsunami. And WTF? Yes, I said tsunami, because when these bonds become instruments in Japan's financial ecosystem, when they gain regulatory imprimatur, when BlackRock and other mega funds start sizing positions quietly, the repricing will not be incremental. It will be explosive, and all the FUD that has been shouted from the rooftops will collapse under the weight of systemic adoption. Because power does not negotiate with rumors. It moves with certainty. And right now, XRP is positioned at the exact intersection of authority, technology, and regulatory clearance, and that is why this is the moment that separates spectators from serious players. Now, let's talk about the part everyone wants but few truly understand: the price justification, the final warning, and why ignoring this could be catastrophic. Because this is where theory meets dollars, yen, and institutional math. And the numbers are screaming, not whispering, because when you combine Japan's sovereign-level bond appetite with XRP's settlement efficiency, predictable liquidity, and growing regulatory clarity, you get a structural setup that is literally designed to reprice the asset violently higher once the first official issuances are live. And yes, I am talking about a shift that could make previous ATHEs look quaint, because this is not retail hype. This is macro financial engineering. And when entities like Goldman Sachs and Citibank start quietly modeling exposure to XRP-linked instruments, you are witnessing a pricing phenomenon that is both inevitable and systemic. Let's be brutally clear. This is not about chasing a coin. This is about understanding leverage, institutional velocity, and the fact that Japan's legal and financial scaffolding effectively guarantees that early entrants, those who understand the mechanics, will be at the front of the line, while retail catches up years later, paying a multiple for what was accessible at a fraction of the risk before the dominoes fell. And ask yourself, how often does a major economy like Japan silently integrate a digital asset into its financial infrastructure without signaling it? Rarely, almost never, and that is exactly why you should sit up and pay attention. Because this is not incremental growth, this is systemic adoption, disguised as quiet structuring. And the price implications are not suggestions, they are consequences. Consequences of alignment, authority, and scale. And here is your final warning, because complacency is lethal in markets like this, and I do not say this lightly. When XRP bonds begin circulating, when the settlement efficiency becomes tangible, and when megafunds quietly allocate capital, you will not be able to buy in at pre-repricing levels, and the mainstream will scramble to explain why suddenly XRP moved. But you already knew, because you watched, you listened, and you positioned yourself ahead of the curve, ahead of the herd, ahead of a narrative shift that redefines how digital assets and sovereign-level finance intersect. And this is the moment to internalize urgency, because the window to act with intelligence, not impulse, is narrowing every single day, and the moment Japan flips the switch, everything changes, and those who hesitated will only have regrets. So, look at this not as speculation, but as a blueprint, a playbook of authority, data, and timing, because XRP in the Japanese bond market is not a maybe, it is a structural inevitability, and the final call is this: either you acknowledge the reality, understand the mechanics, and position accordingly, or you watch from the sidelines as a tidal wave of institutional adoption reshapes value, liquidity, and global perception in a way that will leave latecomers wondering how they missed what was hiding in plain sight all along. Should I write the conclusion? Yes. In conclusion, what you have just witnessed is not hype. It is a roadmap of financial evolution, a clear line drawn between those who understand systemic shifts and those who wait for headlines, because XRP bonds in Japan represent far more than a niche experiment. They are a signal, a blueprint, and a launchpad for a new era of digital finance where legitimacy, institutional adoption, and regulatory clarity converge to create unprecedented opportunity. And this is exactly why the mainstream will continue to downplay it while the informed few quietly position themselves, because power never asks for permission. It moves silently, decisively, and with precision. And now, having seen the mechanics, the authorities involved, and the inevitable catalyst, you have the choice to act intelligently or be left scrambling, because when the wave hits, it will be relentless, and the price, adoption, and global perception of XRP will be rewritten in ways that those who hesitated will only comprehend in hindsight. So remember, this is more than crypto. This is the intersection of sovereign finance and next-generation settlement. This is the moment to understand, to observe, and to position with clarity, foresight, and urgency, because the insiders are already moving. The bonds are already being structured, and the future of XRP in the Japanese financial system is no longer a question. It is a certainty, and the only variable left is how prepared you are to ride the inevitable wave.